Welcome back. You're watching The Glow. South Sudan President Salva Kiir has ordered military officers loyal to his vice president, Riek Machar, to be officially integrated into a unified command of the army. Kiir says a unified army is a central pillar of the long-running peace process in the world's youngest nation.
Kiir and Machar's forces signed a peace agreement in 2018 that ended 5 years of civil war. But implementation has been slow, and the opposing forces have clashed frequently over disagreements about how to share power. Fighting has flared in recent weeks. Following pressure from donors and international partners, the two men met on April 8th, and Machar submitted a list of officers to be absorbed into the security services. Machar's Sudan People's Liberation Movement, or army, in opposition, had suspended its participation in the peace deal's oversight mechanisms last month, citing attacks by government forces. Machar's military spokesman Lam Paul Gabriel said the move would help stop the ongoing ceasefire violations in different parts of the country. The next step is to graduate SPLM-IO soldiers from training centers and integrate them into the army. But details remain to be worked out, including the precise ratio of troops from each side. South Sudan's civil war from 2013 to 2018 often fought along ethnic lines, claimed an estimated 400,000 lives, triggered a famine, and created Africa's biggest refugee crisis since the 1994 genocide in Rwanda.
We speak now to African Affairs Analyst Izak Khomo about these latest developments. A very good evening to you, Dr. Khomo. Let's first start with the mechanism, the process of inculcating rival armies into one unit. How would this be borne out, seen through?
Thank you, and hi to you. Well, basically, the most important thing in an army is the officer corps. The officer corps is very important, even if the army has got to fight a war. Without having a unified officer corps, now you don't have an army. So basically, this job of having a joint officer corps or officer corps from all the warring sectors, that is from the SPLM government and also from the SPLM-IO or SPLM in opposition. That is a major thing in actually having a unified army. And once you've got a unified army, that's when you can actually unify the ranks and the other units of the army. So that is a very important thing. But I think with South Sudan, they've got to go much further than just uniting these two warring forces. That is the SPLM force, which is the force of the state force, the government in power, the party in power, and the SPLM in opposition. But they should also go to militias, tribal militias, which are very, very important. In Sudan, one of the key issues, which ability, it's not only the political animosity between these two ethnic groups, the Nuer and the Dinka, but also there are ethnic militias of the Murle, Didiga, and others. Now, these have got a traditional animosity whereby they raid each other. And now they've got huge age-set armies, and these are under warlords. Now they've actually got to get a way of bringing those warlords into the central command and fusing in some of these elements. Then you're going to be assured of peace throughout the Sudan.
So this is obviously part of the promises made in the 2018 peace agreement. It's taken a very long time. Various mediators have been involved, including the AU, the UN, and IGAD. The proposed mechanisms, is it being followed to the T? Have there been deviations along the way?
Well, you see, with the 2018 peace agreement, that peace agreement, it was actually signed, but then it could not be implemented fully. And then they had to get another peace agreement, a comprehensive one, which will actually sort of, it was an addendum to this other one. Now, the issue about actually implementing the peace agreement, it's multifaceted, because it's not only the unison of the army which is needed, they also need to decide as to what type of nation they're going to have. Will it be a nation which is much more run on a federated state, the thing that the Nuer or the SPLM-IO want, with the different regions having a governor and that governor being semi-autonomous, and also the number of provinces in the Sudan? There have been that pool whereby the government, I think it wanted to reduce the number of provinces, whereas the Nuer wanted the provinces to be much more, so that basically they could give some of the elites, tribal elites, fiefdom to which they could rule, and issues like that. Now, those were delaying the unison of the peace, of implementing the peace agreement. Now, it ended up that with the delay, the chances of there being flare-ups was actually being increased. And I think this issue of literally getting the army units together, that basically will solve the military issue and leave other issues to a political situation, whereas they've done away with the military animosity. And I think that's the best move that they could ever get.
But oversight is very important, given the differences that you've pointed out have existed between the parties, because at the core of it is power sharing. So what happens next? How do we know how will everybody be kept in line to make sure that they keep to what they've agreed to?
Well, the most important thing basically is not even power sharing. I mean, what we are going through is a transition period. And in the transition period, that's where there'll be power sharing. And the power sharing, I think, that has already been decided, whereby you've got a president and you've got a vice president, where the president comes from the SPLM and the vice president from the SPLM-IO, or in opposition. Now, the most important thing is actually to go through this transition period. And the transition period, it has got its landmarks. Yeah, it has got its landmarks. In fact, one of the things that they're supposed to actually put in place is a new constitution that is going to take the Sudanese people into an election, whereby with this election, they're actually going to get government which is going to take Sudan forward. Now, basically, this power sharing thing is sort of permanent thing. They've got a power sharing state formation, which basically will manage, which has got to manage this transition period, where they've got to put in fact, it's a nation building period, where they've got to put in the executive, the tools of executive, the army, the security forces, and from there to get the legalistic, the judiciary in place, and from there to get the constitution. And that constitution, basically a constitution that will take the country to an election. And once the elections are there and the victory being achieved, now everything else will be plain sailing. But those are the different stages that are involved.
And the different multilateral bodies that I've mentioned that could aid the process, especially as we know that 3/4 of the oil reserves lie in undivided Sudan. It would need partnerships. So the AU, the UN, IGAD, as you mentioned, what role can they play?
Well, the most important player there, in fact, there are two most important players, but the most important player, basically, it is the Sudan, where because although the oil is in the South Sudan, the pipeline runs north to Port Sudan. Yeah, and whatever happens, South Sudan and Sudan, they're still very much attached by the hip, although they say they've separated. But that separation, I think, there's a possibility to be temporary, because it should be remembered that when the South Sudan declared independence and they lowered down the Sudanese flag for the last time in Juba, that flag was lowered down by Salva Kiir. But then instead of handing the flag to the then president of Sudan, al-Bashir, Salva Kiir says that this is part of us, we are keeping this flag. Now that was a sign that saying that we are not totally breaking away from the Sudan. That idea of the new Sudan of the late John Garang is still being floated. So basically with this peace deal which is coming on, some people who are far-sighted, they actually see the peace deal in the south, a peace deal in the north, and in the north, once they solve their racial problems and everything else, there could be a unification of the Sudan. That is a possibility. But it needs to actually be seen if things are going to go that way. But the Sudan and South Sudan, they're really joined at the hip. They cannot just break away from each other.
And the impact and significance of this unification of the various armies, this peace deal for South Sudan itself, given the various ethno divisions that you mentioned earlier on?
Well, it's a very big significant thing because the two major groups, or ethnic groups in South Sudan, the Dinka and the Nuer, in fact, they formed the SPLM army. And before then, there was the Anyanya army. But with the SPLM army, it will be remembered that when the break took place, there was a huge massacre, I think, which took place at Wow. And in that massacre, it is this that the Nuer actually attacked the Dinka forces and they killed a very big group of that. And from there, the animosity started between these two groups. And that's going back about 20 to 30 years. And it will be remembered that Riek Machar and his newer fighters, they moved up north and they became a militia within the government of al-Bashir, fighting against the SPLM forces. But the irony is this, that for the first time when the SPLM, the forces of Riek Machar, when they got united back into the SPLM, it was the efforts of Salva Kiir. People do not know that. John Garang was still alive. There was a very big debate within the SPLM as to whether they should invite back the forces of Riek Machar. And it was Salva Kiir who insisted that the newer forces who were fighting with the government of al-Bashir should be allowed back in the SPLM. So basically, this is the second attempt of unification. And I think the unification is actually taking a right move in the sense that there is no bigger partner. They're going to say they're going to start with the army, and the army is going to be made of equal number of officers who are going to run that army, and going forward, they're going to unite the soldiers. I think that's a very, very important move at the attempt of actually forming the South Sudan nation through actually forming the United Army. That's a very important unit of the nation.
All right. Thank you so much for your time and insights. Ntate Izak Khomo, African Affairs expert. That's where we leave it for now. We are back with more news here on The Globe. Don't go away.